The conference room overlooked the Chicago skyline, 40 stories of glass and steel separating Sebastian Ingram from the noise of the city below. But he barely noticed the view anymore. He sat across from his business partner and closest friend, Richard, watching the older man shake his head with a mixture of disbelief and something that looked like envy. "You know what I realized after 20 years of marriage," Sebastian said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Meyer always knew what I meant, not what I said, but what I actually meant." Richard set down his coffee cup, raising an eyebrow. "That is the whole thing, is it not? That is what everyone is searching for." Sebastian nodded slowly, his eyes distant. But the truth was more complicated than that single observation could capture, and the story of how he had found Maya was not something he talked about often. It had started 5 years ago, when his life looked nothing like it did now. Back then, Sebastian had been drowning in the chaos of building his manufacturing company from the ground up. At 32, he had already made his first million, then his second, then lost track of the numbers as the business exploded beyond his wildest projections. Industrial equipment was not glamorous, but it was essential, and his designs had revolutionized efficiency in factories across the Midwest. Money poured in faster than he could count it, but success had a price that nobody warned him about. He had been standing in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning when everything changed. His father had suffered a heart attack, and Sebastian had rushed from a business dinner in his suit, still smelling of expensive wine and someone's perfume, from an awkward hug goodbye. He had not slept in 30 hours. His phone would not stop buzzing with urgent messages about a contract negotiation in Germany. And he was alone, because that was what happened when you prioritized profit margins over people for too long. The nurse who came through those double doors was not what he expected. She was young, probably close to his age, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that looked like they had seen too much sadness for someone so relatively new to life. Her scrubs were covered in cartoon cats, which seemed absurd given the gravity of the situation, but somehow made her more real, more human. "Mr. Ingram," she had said, and her voice was soft but clear. "Your father is stable. He is resting now. You can see him in about 20 minutes. Sebastian had exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. Thank you so much." She had nodded, professional, already turning to leave, but something made him speak again. "Is he going to be okay? I mean, really okay?" The nurse, whose name tag read Maya Lawson, had paused. She could have given him a generic answer, the kind of careful non-commitment that medical professionals learn to perfect. Instead, she turned back and really looked at him, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "He is going to need to make some changes," she said. "Big ones. Diet, exercise, stress management, and he is going to need support. Real support, not just someone checking in once a month." The words had hit him like a slap. She was not just talking about his father's health. Somehow, in that brief exchange, she had read the guilt written across his face, the shame of realizing he could not remember the last time he had shared a meal with his dad that was not interrupted by work calls. "I understand," Sebastian had said quietly. Maya had given him a small smile then, sad but genuine. "I hope so. He is lucky to have you here." But Sebastian had not felt lucky. He had felt like a fraud. He saw his father through the ICU window after that, pale and hooked up to monitors, and made a promise to himself that things would change. What he did not expect was to see Meyer again, 3 days later, when he came back during visiting hours. She was at the nurse's station, writing notes in a chart, and she glanced up when he approached. Recognition flickered across her face. "Mr. Ingram, your father is doing much better. He has been asking for you." "Sebastian," he said, "please, Mr. Ingram makes me sound like my father." She had given him that sad smile again. "Sebastian, then. He is in room 4. He had visited every day for the next week, adjusting his schedule in ways that made his assistant nearly have a breakdown. Germany would have to wait. The board could make decisions without him for once. His father was awake now, grumpy and embarrassed by his weakness, but alive. And every time Sebastian came to the hospital, he found himself hoping to catch a glimpse of Maya in the hallways. It took him 3 days to work up the courage to do more than exchange pleasantries. She was checking his father's vitals when he finally spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Sebastian said. "About his recovery, I mean." Maya had looked up from the blood pressure cuff, her expression open. "Of course. The doctors keep saying he needs to reduce stress, but they are not very specific about what that actually means. He runs a hardware store. It is not exactly a high-pressure job, but he loves it. Should he sell it? Retire? I have no idea how to help him." She had finished taking the reading before answering, her movements efficient but gentle. His father, stubborn as always, pretended not to be listening, but Sebastian could tell he was hanging on every word. "Stress is not just about the job itself," Maya said. "It is about how much control you feel you have over your life. If he loves the store, taking that away might do more harm than good. But maybe he needs to delegate more, hire help, not feel like he has to do everything himself." She had glanced at Sebastian then, and he wondered if there was a message meant for him too. "What about family?" Sebastian asked. "Does that help, having people around?" "It depends on the family," Maya said diplomatically. "But yes, social support is one of the biggest factors in recovery outcomes. People heal better when they do not feel alone." His father had grunted from the bed. "I am not alone. I have got this one when he bothers to show up." The words had stung, even though they were delivered with his father's typical gruff humor. Sebastian had opened his mouth to defend himself, to list all the valid reasons he had been too busy, but Maya had caught his eye and given a tiny shake of her head. "He is here now," she had said to his father. "That is what matters." It was such a simple statement, but it diffused the tension immediately. His father had looked away, embarrassed by his outburst, and Sebastian had felt a rush of gratitude toward this woman who somehow understood the dynamics of their relationship better than they did. After Maya left the room, his father had spoken again. "She is a good one, that nurse. Actually listens instead of just hearing." Sebastian had agreed, though he was starting to realize that listening was becoming complicated by the fact that he found himself watching the way her hair fell across her cheek when she leaned over to check in Roman 4, or the way her whole face transformed when she smiled at something his father said. It was not appropriate. She was working. He was a patient's family member. There were probably rules about this sort of thing. But awareness did not stop the feeling, and by the time his father was discharged a week later, Sebastian knew he had to do something. He caught Maya in the hallway on the last day, holding a bouquet of flowers that suddenly seemed ridiculously inadequate. "These are for you," he had said, feeling like a teenager. "To say thank you. For everything you did for my dad, but also for being honest with me." Maya had taken the flowers, surprise evident on her face. "You did not have to do this. I know I wanted to." She had smiled, a real smile this time, not sad at all. "Thank you, they are beautiful." Sebastian should have walked away then, should have said goodbye and left it at that. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Can I buy you coffee?" To say thank you properly, Maya had hesitated, and he could see her weighing the appropriateness of it. "I should not," she said. "There are policies about fraternizing with patients' families." "What if I promised my father would never come back?" Sebastian had said, then immediately winced. "That came out wrong. I mean, obviously I hope he stays healthy, but technically he is not your patient anymore, right? She had laughed then, a sound that made something in his chest loosen. Technically, I suppose that is true. So coffee, just coffee, she had said. And I buy my own. I do not want this to seem like something it is not. They had met 2 days later at a small cafe near the hospital, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Maya had arrived in jeans and a sweater, her hair down for the first time, and Sebastian had barely recognized her outside of her work context. She looked younger, softer, but there was still that directness in her gaze that had drawn him to her in the first place. "Tell me about yourself," Sebastian had said. "All I know is that you are an incredible nurse and you have excellent taste in scrub patterns." Maya had laughed, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "The cats are my favorite. They make kids smile, and honestly, they make me smile too." "What else do you want to know?" "Everything. Start with the basics. Where are you from? How did you end up in nursing? What do you do when you are not saving lives?" She had taken a sip of her coffee, considering. "I grew up in Indiana, small town you have never heard of. Came to Chicago for nursing school and never left. I always wanted to help people, and nursing seemed like the most direct way to do that. As for what I do in my free time, mostly I sleep. The hours are brutal, I can imagine. Do you work nights often?" "I rotate. 2 weeks on days, 2 weeks on nights. It destroys your sleep schedule, but you get used to it." They had talked for over 2 hours, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Sebastian learned that Maya was 29, that she had 2 younger brothers, that her parents ran a bed and breakfast in that small Indiana town she had mentioned. She loved mystery novels and terrible reality TV shows, took long walks along the lake when she could not sleep, and made the best chocolate chip cookies in existence, or so she claimed. "You will have to prove that last one," Sebastian had said. "Is that a challenge?" "Absolutely." Maya had studied him across the table. "Okay, your turn. Tell me about Sebastian Ingram, and I want the real story, not the polished version you probably give at business meetings." He had tensed slightly, wondering how much she knew about his company, his money, the life he led outside of hospital waiting rooms. "What do you want to know? Why did you look so lost that night in the hospital? Not just worried about your father, but actually lost." The question had caught him off guard. Nobody asked him things like that. People wanted to know about profit margins and expansion plans and investment opportunities. They did not care about existential crises. "I realized I had been living wrong," Sebastian had said slowly. "Building a business, making money, telling myself it was all for a good reason, but missing everything that actually matters. My father could have died, and the last conversation we had before that night was an argument about why I missed Thanksgiving dinner. I was in Dubai, closing a deal that made me another $2 million, and I missed Thanksgiving." Maya had not said anything, just waited for him to continue. "I have money. More than I ever dreamed of, but I was standing in that waiting room, terrified, and there was nobody to call. No girlfriend, no close friends who were not also business associates, just me and my phone full of emails about contracts and supply chains." "That sounds lonely," Maya had said quietly. "It was. It is." She had reached across the table then, covering his hand with hers. It was a simple gesture, the kind of comfort she probably offered to patients' families all the time, but it had sent electricity through his whole body. "You are here now," she had said. "You made a different choice. That counts for something." They had said goodbye outside the cafe, both of them awkward about how to end the encounter. A handshake seemed too formal. A hug seemed too intimate. They had settled on a smile and a promise to do it again. Sebastian had walked back to his car, pulled out his phone, and immediately texted her. "Thank you for today. I meant what I said. I would love to see you again." Her response had come 5 minutes later. "Me too, but I should warn you, I am terrible at dating. My schedule is insane and I have been told I am too direct." "I like direct," he had texted back. "And I will work around your schedule." That had been the start of something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. They began seeing each other whenever Maya's shifts allowed, which meant strange meeting times like breakfast at 10 at night after her shift ended, or lunch at 7 in the morning before it began. Sebastian adjusted his life in ways that shocked his assistant and confused his business partners. Morning meetings got canceled. Evening dinners got declined. He stopped flying across the country at a moment's notice. On their third date, they had walked along the lakefront as the sun set, the water turning gold and pink. Maya had been telling him about a difficult case, a young mother who had not made it despite everything the team had tried, and Sebastian had seen the weight of it in her shoulders. "How do you do it?" he had asked. "Carry all of that and still keep going." Maya had stopped walking, looking out at the water. "You find meaning in the small things, the patient who does recover, the family member who thanks you, the moment when you know you made a difference, even if it is just holding someone's hand so they are not scared. That takes incredible strength." She had turned to look at him then. "You do the same thing in your own way. You built something from nothing. That takes its own kind of strength. It is not the same. I make equipment. You save lives. You create jobs. You keep factories running, which means people can feed their families. Do not diminish what you do just because it is not medical." It was the first time anyone had framed his work that way, and Sebastian had felt something shift inside him. Maybe he had been so focused on the money, on the markers of success, that he had lost sight of the actual impact. They had dinner at his place for the first time a month into whatever they were building together. Sebastian had been nervous, embarrassed by the excess of his penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and designer furniture. He had made pasta, something simple, afraid that anything too elaborate would seem like showing off. Maya had walked in and immediately gone to the windows, pressing her hands against the glass like a kid. "This is incredible. You can see the whole city." "It is a little ridiculous, honestly. Too much space for one person." She had turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something? And I want an honest answer, always. Does the money matter to you? I mean, really matter beyond what it represents?" Sebastian had thought about it, really thought about it. "It used to. It was how I kept score, proof that I was successful. But lately, no. What matters is having the freedom to make choices, to be here with you instead of on a plane to Berlin, to tell my board that they need to make a decision without me because I have other priorities. What are your priorities now?" He had crossed the room to where she stood, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Figuring out what actually makes me happy. Rebuilding a relationship with my father. Spending time with a woman who makes me want to be a better version of myself." Maya had reached up, touching his face gently. "That is a good start." They had kissed for the first time that night, standing in front of those ridiculous windows with the city lights spread out below them. It was soft and tentative and perfect, and when they pulled apart, Maya had laughed. "What?" Sebastian had asked. "I just realized I have no idea what I am doing. I have not dated anyone seriously in 3 years. I am completely out of practice." "Me too. We can figure it out together." And they had, navigating the complexities of building something real in the midst of demanding careers and past hurts, and the vulnerability that came with letting someone truly see you. Sebastian met Maya's family when they drove to Indiana for a long weekend, her parents warm and welcoming in their rambling bed and breakfast. Her father had pulled Sebastian aside on the second day. ostensibly to show him the vegetable garden, but really to deliver a gentle warning. "My daughter is special," he had said, pulling weeds from between tomato plants. "She does not give her heart easily, but when she does, she gives all of it. Do not waste that." "I have no intention of wasting anything," Sebastian had replied. "I am in love with her." It was the first time he had said it out loud, and the truth of it had settled over him like a blanket. He was in love with Maya Lawson, with her directness and her compassion, and the way she saw through all of his defenses to the person underneath. He told her that night as they sat on the porch swing outside the bed and breakfast, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. Maya had gone very still, and for a terrible moment, Sebastian thought he had made a mistake, moved too fast, assumed too much. Then she had turned to him, tears in her eyes, and said, "I love you too. I have been so scared to say it, but I do. I love you." They had held each other on that swing, the rhythm of it soothing, and Sebastian had felt pieces of himself that had been broken for years start to heal. 6 months into their relationship, Maya met his father for the first time outside of the hospital. The older man had recovered well, following doctor's orders with surprising dedication, and had even hired a manager for his hardware store so he could cut back his hours. He invited them both over for dinner, and Sebastian had been nervous in a way that surprised him. "He is going to love you," Maya had said as they walked up to the modest house in the suburbs. "How could he not? He is picky about people, and protective of me in his own weird way." But his father had opened the door with a grin, recognizing Maya immediately. "The nurse, you are the one who kept me from going crazy in that place." "Guilty as charged," Maya had said, shaking his hand. "Though I seem to remember you were a pretty good patient once you got over the initial grumpiness." "Grumpiness is my natural state. Come in, come in. I made pot roast. Sebastian, your girl here strikes me as someone who appreciates real food." They had spent the evening laughing and talking, his father telling embarrassing stories from Sebastian's childhood while Maya egged him on. At one point, his father had said something about Sebastian being too serious as a kid, always focused on the next goal, never satisfied with where he was. "He still does that sometimes," Maya had said, glancing at Sebastian with affection. "Gets so caught up in planning the future that he forgets to enjoy the present." "And what do you do when that happens?" his father had asked. "I remind him." "Usually by doing something spontaneous that forces him to pay attention." "Like what?" "Last week, I surprised him at his office and dragged him out for ice cream. He had 3 meetings scheduled that afternoon, but I convinced him they could wait." Sebastian had laughed, remembering. "You said life was too short to skip ice cream on a 70-degree day." "And I was right," Maya had said triumphantly. His father had looked between them, something soft in his expression. "You are good for him. I have not seen him this relaxed in years." After dinner, as Sebastian helped his father clear the dishes, the older man had spoken quietly. "Do not screw this up. That woman is the best thing that has ever happened to you." "I know, Dad. Do you? Because I see the way you look at her and it is right. But I also know you, and you have a tendency to sabotage good things when they make you uncomfortable." Sebastian had set down the plate he was holding. "What are you talking about? You have always been afraid of needing people. Even as a kid, you would rather struggle alone than ask for help. But love is about needing someone and letting them need you back. Do not run from that just because it is scary." The words had haunted Sebastian over the following weeks, especially as he and Maya fell deeper into their relationship. They stayed at each other's places more often than not, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Maya liked to read before bed. Sebastian was a morning person who woke up ready to conquer the world. She was messy in an endearing way, leaving coffee cups on every surface. He was almost compulsively organized. They fit together in ways that did not make logical sense, but worked anyway. The first real fight happened on a Tuesday night, after Maya had worked a particularly brutal shift. She came to his place exhausted, barely coherent, and Sebastian had made the mistake of trying to fix things. "You need to talk to your supervisor about the scheduling," he had said as she collapsed onto his couch. "They are working you too hard. It is not sustainable." Maya had looked up at him, irritation flashing in her eyes. "I know my own limits, Sebastian. I am just worried about you. You have been pulling double shifts all week. Because we are understaffed and patients need care, I cannot just walk out because I am tired." "I am not saying you should walk out. I am saying you need to advocate for yourself." Maya had sat up, fully awake now despite her exhaustion. "You do not understand what it is like. This is not some corporate boardroom where you can negotiate terms. People's lives are at stake." "I know that, but your life is at stake too. You are going to burn out if you keep this up." "So what do you want me to do? Quit? Find an easier job? I am a nurse, Sebastian. This is what I signed up for." The argument had escalated from there, both of them saying things they did not mean, until Maya had stood up and grabbed her bag. "I am too tired for this. I am going home." Sebastian had watched her leave, frustration and concern warring inside him. He had waited an hour, then called her. She had not picked up. He had texted an apology. She had responded 3 hours later with, "I need some space to think." That space had lasted 2 days, 2 of the longest days of Sebastian's life. He had thrown himself into work, but everything reminded him of Maya. The coffee shop where they had first really talked. The lake where they walked. The bed that felt too big without her in it. On the 3rd day, she had shown up at his office unannounced. His assistant had buzzed to say someone was there to see him, and when Maya walked through the door, still in her scrubs, he had stood up immediately. "I am sorry," they had both said at the same time. Maya had crossed the room and Sebastian had met her halfway. They held each other, not speaking, just breathing together. "I was being defensive," Maya said finally. "You were right that I need to set better boundaries. I am just so used to pushing through, to being the one who handles everything, that I forgot what it is like to have someone who actually cares about my well-being." "I was being controlling," Sebastian said, "trying to fix things instead of just listening. My dad was right, I do that." "I am working on it." Maya had pulled back to look at him. "We are both works in progress. That is okay, but we have to actually talk to each other when things are hard, not just shut down." "Agreed. And Maya, I need you to know something. When I said I was worried about you, it was not because I think you are weak or incapable. It is because I love you, and the idea of you hurting, physically or emotionally, is unbearable to me." She had kissed him then, fierce and certain. "I love you too. Even when you are annoyingly trying to solve all my problems. Even when you are stubbornly refusing to let me help, especially then." They had worked through it, learning how to fight fair, how to express needs without accusations, how to listen even when they disagreed. Sebastian had attended therapy for the first time in his life, working through his control issues and his fear of vulnerability. Maya had talked to her supervisor about scheduling, setting limits she had never allowed herself before. They grew, both individually and together, the relationship deepening with each challenge they navigated. A year into their relationship, Sebastian had started thinking about the future in concrete terms. He wanted to marry Maya. Wanted to build a life with her that went beyond separate apartments and coordinating schedules. He had started looking at rings, trying to figure out what she would like, when everything had fallen apart in the most unexpected way. His business partner, Richard, had come to him with an opportunity. A massive conglomerate wanted to buy the company, an offer so substantial it made even Sebastian pause. The money was almost irrelevant at this point, but the deal would mean moving to New York for at least 2 years to oversee the transition. "This is what we have been building toward," Richard had said. "Our exit strategy. We take the money, set ourselves up for life, and then you can do whatever you want." Sebastian had thought about it for exactly 10 seconds before saying no. New York meant leaving Maya or asking her to uproot her entire life for his career. After everything they had been through, every conversation about putting people before profit, he was not about to make that mistake. But the decision had eaten at him, doubt creeping in late at night. Was he being irresponsible, letting emotions cloud his judgment? He had mentioned it to Maya casually, expecting her to immediately agree that he had made the right choice. Instead, she had gone quiet, her expression troubled. "You turned it down, without even talking to me about it." "I did not think there was anything to talk about. You have your job here, your life. I was not going to ask you to give that up. But you did not even give me the choice. You made a huge decision about your future, about our future, without including me in the conversation." Sebastian had felt defensive anger rise. "I was protecting us, protecting you. I do not need protection. I need a partner, someone who trusts me enough to actually discuss major life decisions instead of just deciding what is best for everyone." They had fought again, worse this time, because it touched on deeper issues of trust and partnership and what it meant to build a life together. Maya had questioned whether Sebastian really saw her as an equal or just as someone to be taken care of. Sebastian had struggled to articulate that his decision had come from love, not paternalism. It had taken several difficult conversations, more therapy and brutal honesty from both of them to work through it. In the end, Sebastian had realized that his father's warning had been prescient. He had been so afraid of needing Maya, of being vulnerable, that he had tried to control the situation rather than trusting in what they had built together. "If you had asked me," Maya had said during one of those conversations, "I would have told you that I could find nursing work in New York, that I would be willing to move if it was important to you. But I also would have wanted to discuss whether it was the right choice for us together. I am sorry. I thought I was being noble, but really I was just being scared." "Scared of what?" "Of you seeing me as someone who would ask you to sacrifice for my career, of becoming the kind of man who puts business first, of losing you." Maya had taken his hands, her grip firm. "You cannot lose me by including me. You can only lose me by shutting me out. You understand that?" He had understood finally, truly understood. Love was not about grand gestures or protection. It was about trust and communication and choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. The engagement had happened 6 months later, not with an elaborate surprise, but with a conversation. They had been lying in bed on a Sunday morning, the rare day when neither of them had obligations, and Sebastian had turned to her. "I want to marry you. Not someday, not eventually. I want to marry you and build a life that we design together, where we make decisions as partners and trust each other enough to be honest about what we need." Maya had smiled, tears in her eyes. "That sounds perfect. Yes. I have a ring. It is in my sock drawer because I was waiting for the right moment. But the right moment is just this, us being honest." "Can I see it?" He had retrieved the ring, a simple band with a single diamond, elegant but not ostentatious. Maya had loved it, loved the thought he had put into choosing something that fit her rather than something flashy meant to impress. They had gotten married 8 months later, a small ceremony at her parents' bed and breakfast, surrounded by family and close friends. Richard had been Sebastian's best man, shaking his head with amused disbelief, at how his partner had transformed from a workaholic millionaire into a man who cried during his own vows. Those vows had been promises about communication, about choosing each other, about building something that honored both of their dreams. Maya had promised to let him help when she needed it, to trust in his love even when her independence made her want to push him away. Sebastian had promised to include her in decisions, to remember that strength came from vulnerability, to never stop working on becoming the partner she deserved. The first year of marriage had been an adjustment, learning how to navigate shared finances and future planning and the reality of truly merging lives. Maya had been shocked to learn the full extent of Sebastian's wealth, having never really asked for specifics. He had been embarrassed, worried it would change how she saw him, but she had simply shrugged and said it was his money, not hers. And as long as he was not doing anything unethical to earn it, she did not care. They had eventually compromised, establishing joint accounts for shared expenses while maintaining separate accounts for personal spending. Sebastian had wanted to pay off Maya's student loans, a gesture that had led to another fight about independence and equity, resolved only when they framed it as an investment in their shared future rather than charity. Work had continued to be a balancing act. Sebastian had scaled back his involvement in the day-to-day operations, bringing in a COO to handle the details while he focused on strategic direction. It meant more flexibility, more time to actually live the life he wanted. Maya had moved to a different unit at the hospital, one with slightly better hours, and had started mentoring new nurses, finding satisfaction in teaching that complemented her clinical work. They had bought a house together, something smaller than Sebastian's penthouse, but perfect for them, with a yard and a kitchen big enough for Maya's baking experiments. His father had become a regular fixture at Sunday dinners, his health stable, his relationship with Sebastian better than it had been in decades. 2 years into their marriage, they had started talking about children. It was a tentative conversation at first, both of them aware of the logistics, the sacrifices, the way it would change everything. Maya had been honest about her fears, about bringing a child into the world when her job regularly showed her how fragile life could be. Sebastian had been honest about his own uncertainties, about whether he could be the kind of father he wanted to be, or if he would fall back into old patterns of prioritizing work. They had decided to try, approaching it with the same communication and honesty that had become the foundation of their relationship. It had taken 8 months, months of hope and disappointment and learning patience, before Maya had woken him up one morning with tears streaming down her face and a positive pregnancy test in her hand. "We are going to have a baby," she had said, her voice breaking. Sebastian had held her, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it, the joy and terror intertwined. They were going to be parents. They were going to create a whole new person and try not to mess them up too badly. The pregnancy had been relatively smooth, though Sebastian had driven Maya crazy with his overprotectiveness. She had threatened to ban him from doctor's appointments after he questioned the obstetrician about every minor concern. They had compromised, establishing boundaries about when his worry was helpful and when it was just anxiety run amok. Their daughter had been born on a cold January morning, arriving 3 weeks early and surprising everyone with her determination to enter the world on her own schedule. Sebastian had been terrified during the labor, watching Maya in pain and feeling utterly helpless. But when the nurse, not Maya this time but a kind woman named Patricia, had placed that tiny screaming bundle in his arms, something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of the world. This was what mattered. This small person, so vulnerable and perfect and entirely dependent on them, not profit margins or business deals or any of the things he had once thought defined success. This, love in its purest, most uncomplicated form. They had named her Sarah, after his grandmother, a woman he barely remembered but who his father spoke of with profound affection. Sarah Ingram, 7 pounds and 8 ounces, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. The first months of parenthood had been brutal in ways nobody adequately warned them about. The sleep deprivation, the constant worry, the feeling of being entirely out of their depth. But they had navigated it together, taking shifts, asking for help when they needed it, learning to laugh at the absurdity of being covered in various baby fluids at 3 in the morning. Sebastian had taken 3 months of paternity leave, something that shocked his board but that he insisted on. Richard had called him soft, teasing, but with real affection. His father had visited twice a week, offering wisdom and practical help and the gift of a few hours of sleep while he watched his granddaughter. Maya had struggled with going back to work after her maternity leave, torn between her love of nursing and her desire to be with Sarah. They had talked through it, exploring options, until they landed on a part-time schedule that gave her some of both. Money was not an issue, which Sebastian was grateful for, even as he tried not to make Maya feel like his wealth was solving all their problems. Sarah had grown into a toddler with opinions about everything, fearless and curious and exhausting. She loved books and trucks and refused to sleep through the night until she was almost 2. She had her mother's compassion, crying when other children cried, offering her toys to comfort them. She had her father's determination, refusing to give up on challenges even when they frustrated her. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they had managed to get a babysitter and go out to dinner, just the 2 of them. It felt strange at first, like they had forgotten how to be just Sebastian and Maya rather than Sarah's parents. But the conversation had flowed, catching up on thoughts and dreams that extended beyond diaper changes and daycare logistics. "You ever regret it?" Maya had asked over dessert. "The life you could have had if you had taken that deal, if you had stayed focused on business instead of us." Sebastian had not even needed to think about it. Never, not for a single second. That life would have been empty. This, what we have, is everything. Even when Sarah threw up on you this morning, even then. Especially then, actually, because you laughed so hard you snorted, and that was the best sound I have heard all week. Maya had reached across the table, linking her fingers with his. "I love you. Not the millionaire, not the CEO, just you. The man who reads bedtime stories in funny voices and cries at kids' movies, and always knows what I mean even when I do not say it right." And that was the heart of it, the thing he had tried to explain to Richard in that conference room. Maya knew him, really knew him, saw past all the surfaces and defenses to the person underneath. She knew when he was stressed even when he claimed to be fine. She knew when he needed space and when he needed to be pushed. She knew what his silences meant, what his jokes were covering, what his gestures were really saying. It went both ways, of course. Sebastian had learned to read Maya's moods, to distinguish between tired and overwhelmed, between needing practical help and just needing to vent. He knew what it meant when she started baking at midnight, or when she went for long runs, or when she got very quiet during family gatherings. He knew her, and being known like that was intimacy in its truest form. They had continued to grow together over the years, adding a second child, a son they named Samuel, who was calmer than his sister but with his own brand of stubborn independence. The house had gotten louder, messier, fuller. Sebastian's business had continued to thrive, but he had maintained the boundaries they had established, prioritizing family dinners and bedtime routines, and being present for the small moments that ended up being the big moments. Maya had eventually shifted to part-time teaching at a nursing school, loving the ability to shape the next generation of caregivers while maintaining a schedule that worked better with their family life. She still picked up occasional shifts at the hospital, maintaining her clinical skills, but the brutal rotating schedule was behind her. On their 10th anniversary, Sebastian had taken Maya back to that coffee shop where they had their first real conversation. It looked exactly the same, still with the mismatched furniture and local art. They sat at a corner table, watching people come and go, marveling at how much had changed in a decade. "You remember what you said to me that first time?" Maya asked. "About realizing you had been living wrong." "I do, I meant it. Everything before you was just motion without meaning." "That is not entirely true. You built something real with your company. You reconciled with your father. Those things mattered. They did. But they did not feel like they mattered until I had someone to share them with." Maya had smiled, that same smile that had captured him in a hospital hallway all those years ago. "You are going to make me cry in public, and I have a reputation to maintain." "What reputation is that?" "Tough nurse who does not get emotional. I have seen you cry at commercials about puppies." "Your secret is safe with me." She had laughed, and Sebastian had thought about how much he loved that sound, how it had become the soundtrack of his happiness. They had ordered coffee and pastries, talking about their kids and their work and their dreams for the future. Maya wanted to write a textbook about patient communication. Sebastian was thinking about establishing a foundation focused on manufacturing education. They were both still growing, still becoming, but doing it together. The years had continued to pass, marked by school plays and soccer games and family vacations. Sarah had inherited her mother's empathy and was already talking about becoming a doctor. Samuel was fascinated by how things worked, taking apart electronics and driving Maya crazy by leaving screws and wires all over the house. They were good kids, happy kids, growing up in a home filled with love and laughter, and the kind of security that came from knowing their parents were a team. Sebastian's father had lived to meet his grandchildren, to see his son transformed into the man he had always known he could be. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78, Sebastian had grieved deeply, but without regret. They had healed their relationship. They had said the things that mattered. There was sadness but not guilt, loss but not unfinished business. Maya had held him through that grief, understanding without needing explanation what he needed in those dark days. She knew when to talk and when to sit in silence. She knew when to encourage him to share memories and when to simply exist beside him. She always knew what he meant, even when he could not articulate it himself. Now, sitting across from Richard in that conference room, watching his friend shake his head at the simple profundity of finding someone who truly understood you, Sebastian felt grateful beyond measure. His life had not turned out the way he had once imagined. It was not about corner offices and private jets and the kind of success that looked impressive in magazine profiles. It was about Sunday morning pancakes and inside jokes and the weight of his wife's hand in his. It was about being known and loved for who he actually was, not who he pretended to be. "You are lucky," Richard said, breaking the silence. "Not everyone finds that." "I know," Sebastian replied. "Believe me, I know." He thought about Maya at home, probably helping Sarah with homework while keeping Samuel from dismantling the toaster. He thought about the dinner they would share tonight, nothing fancy, just the four of them around the table talking about their days. He thought about the life they had built, brick by brick, choice by choice, conversation by conversation. Richard stood up, gathering his papers. "I should let you go. I know you have that thing with Sarah's school tonight. Parent-teacher conferences. Maya says Sarah is doing great, but you know how she is. wants to hear it directly from the teachers. That woman keeps you honest, Sebastian smiled. That is what I love about her. He left the office shortly after, driving through Chicago traffic, eager to get home. The penthouse he had once lived in was now occupied by a young executive, someone probably making the same mistakes Sebastian had made, prioritizing all the wrong things. He hoped that person would figure it out before too much time passed, before they found themselves standing in a hospital waiting room, realizing how empty their life had become. But maybe not everyone needed that wake-up call. Maybe some people got lucky, met the right person at the right time, learned the lessons without having to hit bottom first. He hoped so. He hoped the world was full of people who understood what he and Richard had talked about, that finding someone who really knew you, who understood what you meant even when your words failed, was the whole thing. Everything else was just details. Maya was in the kitchen when he walked in, stirring something on the stove while simultaneously helping Samuel with his math homework. Sarah was sprawled on the couch, reading a book that looked too advanced for her age, but she had always been like that, pushing herself. Dad's home. Samuel shouted, abandoning his homework to run over. Sebastian scooped him up, marveling at how heavy he had gotten. Soon he would be too big for this, but for now, Sebastian held on tight. Sarah looked up from her book and smiled, waving but not abandoning her reading. She was her mother's daughter, able to hold space for multiple feelings at once, happy to see him but also deeply invested in her story. Maya turned from the stove, and their eyes met across the kitchen. No words needed. She smiled, he smiled back, and in that exchange was everything they had built together. Understanding and love and the deep comfort of being truly known. "How was your day?" Maya asked, coming over to kiss him hello. "Good. Richard and I had an interesting conversation." "About what?" "About you, actually. About how you always know what I mean." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned that you are sitting around discussing me?" He was jealous, I think, or maybe just reflective. He made an observation and I told him a story. "Our story, parts of it." "The important parts." She rested her head against his shoulder for just a moment, a gesture of affection and connection. "It is a good story. It is. And it is not over yet." Samuel wiggled to get down, returning to his homework with exaggerated sighs about how hard fractions were. Sarah closed her book, joining them in the kitchen to report on a drama at school. Maya returned to the stove, and Sebastian set the table, falling into the rhythm of their evening routine. This was his life now. Not conference rooms and board meetings, though those still happened. Not wealth and success measured in zeros on a bank statement, though that was still part of reality. But this. Family dinners and homework help, and the ordinary magic of being together. Love that had been tested and proven, that had survived fights and doubts, and the hard work of actually building something real. Later that night, after the kids were in bed and he and Maya were finally alone, they sat on their back porch watching the stars. It was a clear night, unusually so for the city, and the sky was full of light. "What did you really talk about with Richard?" Maya asked, her head on his shoulder. "He asked me about my secret, how I had managed to change my life so completely. And I told him the truth, that I met you and you saw me, really saw me, and that made all the difference. I did not change you, Sebastian. You changed yourself. You gave me a reason to. You showed me what life could be if I stopped hiding behind work and money and all the things I thought defined me." Maya was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "You did the same for me, you know. I was so focused on being independent, on never needing anyone, that I had built walls I did not even realize were there. You made it safe to let someone in. We saved each other then. We chose each other. Every day we keep choosing each other. That is what makes it work." Sebastian pulled her closer, feeling the weight and warmth of her against him. She was right, of course. She was always right about these things. Love was not about being swept away or dramatic gestures or finding your missing piece. It was about choice, commitment, and the daily practice of showing up for each other even when it was hard. They sat there until the cold drove them inside, talking about nothing and everything, the conversation flowing easily the way it always had. And when they finally went to bed, curled up together in the darkness, Sebastian thought about that moment in the hospital hallway when he had first met Maya. He had been lost then, drowning in success that felt hollow, and she had been the lighthouse that showed him the way home. Not home to a place, but home to himself. Home to the life he actually wanted, the person he was capable of being when fear did not run the show. Home to love that was real and complicated and absolutely worth every bit of work it required. She always knew what he meant. That was the whole thing, just like Richard had said. But it was also just the beginning, the foundation on which they had built everything else. Understanding was the starting point, but from there came trust and communication and vulnerability. Came fights and reconciliation and growth. Came children and mortgages and careers that evolved. Came life in all its messy, beautiful complexity. And through it all, Maya knew him. Knew his fears and dreams and the places where he was still healing. Knew when to push and when to support. Knew what his silences meant and what his jokes were hiding. Knew him in a way that made him feel less alone in the world. He knew her too, had learned to read her moods and needs with the same accuracy. Had learned that strength sometimes looked like asking for help, that love sometimes meant stepping back instead of forward. Had learned that two independent people could build something together that was stronger than either of them alone. The story did not end there, of course. Stories never really ended, just continued in different forms. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and fear and uncertainty. There would be teenage years to survive, college decisions to navigate, eventually grandchildren if they were lucky. There would be aging parents and career changes and the evolution that came with decades together. Life was long and full of things they could not predict, but whatever came, they would face it together. With honesty and communication and the deep knowing that came from years of showing up for each other. With love that had been tested and proven, that had survived everything thrown at it and emerged stronger. Sebastian fell asleep that night with Maya in his arms, grateful beyond measure for the woman who had walked into a hospital waiting room and changed the trajectory of his entire existence. Grateful for every moment that had led him to her, even the painful ones. Grateful for the life they had built and the love they had cultivated and the family they had created. She always knew what he meant. And in the end, that had made all the difference.